Social Studies World History 19. Demonstrate an understanding of the global, political, economic, and social impact of World War II. Explain post-World War II policies and plans for economic recovery. Include the Marshall Plan for Europe, MacArthur's Plan for Japan, and the formation of the United Nations, NATO, and the Warsaw Pact. Following the final events of World War II, the world was left with the daunting task of rebuilding the political, economic, and social systems of much of the world. The Marshall Plan, so named because it was the idea of U.S. Secretary of State George C. Marshall, was enacted in 1948. The plan called for a 4-year, $15 billion aid package that would help to rebuild Europe following the devastation of the war. Cities could be rebuilt, and industries and basic infrastructure that had been destroyed could be restored and improved. Europe's transportation infrastructure, such as railroads, roads, bridges, and ports, had suffered extensive damage during airstrikes, and the shipping fleets of many nations were now either extensively damaged or non-existent. Providing this scope of aid would yield the positive byproduct of restoring economic health to many of America's primary trading partners. President Harry Truman signed the Marshall Plan on April 3, 1948, and funds were distributed to 16 European nations, including Britain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, West Germany, and Norway. The amounts given to countries varied according to the amount of damage sustained and the nation's potential for restoring stability to Europe. The 3 nations that received the largest amount of aid were West Germany, France, and Great Britain. Another goal of the Marshall Plan was to halt the spread of communism in the regions then controlled by the Soviet Union. Relations between the United States and the Soviet Union began to deteriorate rapidly throughout 1948. In June of 1948, the Soviets blocked all ground travel into the American occupation zone in West Berlin. A massive U.S. airlift of food and other essentials sustained the population until the Soviets lifted the blockade in May 1949, just 1 month after the formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. The 11 original members of NATO were Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Great Britain, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, and Portugal. And the agreement stated that an armed attack against one or more of them shall be considered an attack against them all. As an interesting side note, the only time that NATO has invoked the Common Protection Clause was following the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Buildings in New York City in 2001. In June of 1949, the United States Senate ratified the NATO treaty by the significant margin of 80-19. During the next few years, Greece, Turkey, and West Germany also joined. NATO continues across Europe and North America into modern times, and most recently held their 29th Summit of the Heads of State and Government in Brussels, Belgium on July the 11th, 12th of 2018. The Soviet Union condemned NATO as an alliance to promote aggression and responded with their own parallel creation, the Warsaw Pact, a military agreement between the Soviet Union and its Eastern European satellites in 1955. The original 8 member nations were the Soviet Union, Albania, Poland, Romania, Hungary, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Bulgaria. Like NATO, the Warsaw Pact pledged mutual military support and went a step further by placing the militaries of the member Pact nations under centralized Soviet control, then directed by Marshal Ivan Konev. The Warsaw Pact was in effect until 1991 and saw its membership slowly erode over its 36-year existence due to protests and ideological shifts away from strict interpretations of Marxism toward democratic forms of governments in the countries of Poland, Czechoslovakia, and a reunified Germany, among others. In addition to European reconstruction, Japan also experienced occupation and underwent strategic economic and cultural reforms following World War II. In September of 1945, an Allied Council comprised of representatives from Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and Republic of China was established by the United States and led by General Douglas MacArthur. MacArthur took charge of the Supreme Command of Allied Powers, or SCAP, and began the work of rebuilding Japan. Between 1945 to 1947, the Allies punished the Japanese leaders of the war through implementing war crimes trials in Tokyo. SCAP dismantled the Japanese army and mandated that former military leaders were prohibited from assuming leadership roles in the new government. SCAP also elevated the rights of Japanese tenant farmers and reduced the power and control of the pro-war wealthy landowners and business conglomerates. This eventually resulted in a shift in the Japanese economy from one of command to a free market capitalist system. In 1947, Allied advisors dictated a new constitution to Japan's leaders. The role of the emperor was downgraded to that of a ceremonial figurehead, with the actual power being wielded by the parliament. SCAP promoted greater rights and privileges for women, negated Japan's sovereignty in waging war, and eliminated all non-defensive Japanese armed forces. But with the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950, the United States began to relax its strictures on Japan due to a newer Asian threat, that of increasing communist influence in Asia. The U.S. established bases in Okinawa to supply war efforts, and a new level of cooperation was reached in 1951 as Japan and America exchanged strategic location for guaranteed military protection through the passage of a bilateral security pact. As tensions during the 1940s and 50s continued to intensify over the philosophical differences between democracy and communism, the role of the United Nations in maintaining world peace also intensified. The UN was theoretically founded in January of 1942 during the Second World War, with the issuance of a document entitled the Declaration by United Nations. Under the leadership of Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, the representatives of 26 nations initially pledged the support of their governments to continue fighting together against the Axis powers. Those nations were the United States of America, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, China, Australia, Belgium, Canada, Costa Rica, Cuba, Czechoslovakia, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Greece, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, India, Luxembourg, Netherlands, New Zealand, Nicaragua, Norway, Panama, Poland, South Africa, and Yugoslavia. The current United Nations was officially chartered in 1945 by 51 nations with the stated goals to keep peace throughout the world, to develop friendly relations among nations, to help nations work together to improve the lives of poor people, to conquer hunger, disease, and illiteracy, and to encourage respect for each other's rights and freedoms, and to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations to achieve these goals. The Charter stated that before it would go into effect, it must be ratified by the governments of the Republic of China, France, the USSR, the United Kingdom, and the United States, and by a majority of the other 46 nations. These actions were completed on October 24, 1945, and the United Nations was officially formed. Presently, there are 193 member states where nations express their views through the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, and other bodies and committees. Rather than list the sovereign world nations that are in the UN, it is more feasible to list those who are not. The two are Vatican City and Palestine. The organization is financed by assessed fees and voluntary contributions from its member states. Every member state is legally obligated to pay their respective share toward peacekeeping. UN objectives include maintaining international peace and security, protecting human rights, delivering humanitarian aid, promoting sustainable development, and upholding international law throughout the world. The UN is the largest and most powerful intergovernmental organization in the world, with an annual budget of approximately $6.7 billion. Fees are assessed according to nation wealth, and currently this computes in the following way. The top 10 providers of assessed contributions to United Nations peacekeeping operations for 2018 are: number 1, the United States. They provide 28.47% of the operational budget. China at 10.25%. Japan 9.68%. Germany 6.39%. France 6.28%. The United Kingdom 5.77%. The Russian Federation 3.99%. Italy 3.75%. Canada 2.92%, and Spain at 2.44%. Though the success of the United Nations in preventing world conflicts since 1945 may be debated, it may also be argued that the UN has been successful in providing a common venue for nations to publicly air their issues in an open forum, rather than pursue their own private agendas. The sanctions imposed by the UN against nations that do not comply with the stated goals of the organizational charter may be said to have had a positive and limiting effect on acts of aggression that may have otherwise erupted into wide-scale conflicts.